Hello, everybody. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. You are in such a treat tonight. We have an amazing event for you, and I'm going to go ahead and let the professionals, our authors of the evening, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I am Sarah Beth Durst, and this is Emily Martin. And actually, I'm gesturing this way because she's this way on my screen, but I don't actually know. Are you this way? Are you both? Like, where are you? We're both very glad to be joining you guys tonight. I am a fantasy writer. I write fantasy for adults, teens, and kids. My newest book, let me show you guys because I have it here, is Erase the Sands. Oh, she has it too. That's awesome. It's Erase the Sands, and it came out a couple weeks ago. It's epic fantasies, standalone. It's about two women who are vying to become champions of the elite sport of monster racing. And it is from Harper Voyager, just like Emily Martin's book, Sunshield, which we'll be talking about today. So Emily, would you like to describe it and then maybe read us a 5-minute passage from it?
Sure, yeah. So this book is, it's been sort of described as eco-fantasy. I call it a fantasy adventure for nature nerds. But it's kind of a Wild West adventure in sort of a fantasy setting. And it's very much inspired by my time I work as a park ranger with the National Park Service. And so it's very much drawn from my experiences and the time that I spend out in the wilderness. So, yeah.
And it's awesome. I can vouch for that. I have read it and I loved it.
Thank you. Do you want me to go ahead and do a reading from it?
Yeah, give everybody a taste of it. And then after that, we will talk for a while. And I have questions for you.
All right.
And then we can also take questions from anybody out there watching. If you want to just type it in, we will answer your questions as well.
That's great. So I have two little short passages there are three rotating protagonists in this book, and one of them, Lark, is the kind of the titular Sunshield Bandit. She's an outlaw in the desert. And there are two short little passages in one of her first chapters that I think really show her character really well. So the first part of this chapter goes like this. The thunderhead builds behind me, sending its snarls and rumbles out over the sagebrush flats and broken rock arches. I breathe deeply from Gemma's back, relishing the cool blue feel of the air. I need rain. The desert always needs rain, but these past few days in particular, I especially need the rain. I needed to rinse the mats from rat's fur and replenish the water pocket in 3 lines. I needed to flush out creatures from their dens, to draw them down to my deadfall traps. I needed to bring the bloom to the yellow lilies and the yampa so I can dig up their bulby roots without crawling around the rocks trying to guess if a certain weed is poisonous or not. But I need the rain for myself, too. The anticipation of a good thing is always better than actually having the good thing, because good things never last. Soft blankets get gritty and threadbare. Fresh cornbread goes hard and stale if it's not eaten quick enough. And the rain-washed desert dries up all too fast, the sudden blossoms and rushing gullies giving way back to tough plant flesh and cracked earth. No, give me the expectation of a thunderstorm over its aftermath any day. At least when it ends in the actual event, rather than the memory. So I really like that passage for introducing Lark because she is a bandit. She's an outlaw. She's got a price on her head. She robs stagecoaches. But
awesome.
She has this kind of introspective nature, and she really even though she lives in this very harsh desert environment, she really has a way of looking at it that is actually very emotional. She has kind of an emotional connection, which is similar sometimes to how I feel when I'm out working my job or looking at the landscape that I'm in. It's easy to see kind of the power there, but also feel a very deep emotional connection to that landscape. And so I really like that about her character, that even though she's this wanted criminal, basically, she has this kind of more introspective side. But life in the desert is not easy, and there are lots of things that she has to contend with. And in just the chapter that I just started reading doesn't stay that idyllic for very long, and she gets chased out of town basically by sort of the sheriff's posse And the thunderstorm is really raging around her in earnest now. And so this part, the reason I like reading this part is because it was inspired by several experiences that I've had while out in the backcountry. So this part goes, a bolt of lightning strikes the ground in the distance. I bite down a sense of panic. Out in the middle of this wide open land, I'm the tallest thing there is. I should pull over and take cover down in the ditch, but what if the sheriff comes after me? Will she give chase in this weather? Or will she count on the elements taking care of me before I'm a mile out of town? Tomorrow morning, she'll be able to trot out here and retrieve my body, charred black as a burnt biscuit. At the next ground strike, perhaps a mile in front of us, I throw caution to the wind and guide Gemma off the main track. She veers into the sage. Rat runs along behind, winding in and out of the brush. His ears are flat against his head, tail slightly tucked. I try to whistle some encouragement to him, but it's lost to the next crack of thunder. The world goes white. The bolt hits so close, I can feel it buzz through my body. Gemma pulls up short, whinnying. Without waiting to be thrown from the saddle, I swing to the ground and gather up her reins. Dipping my hat against the driving rain, I run, dragging Gemma blindly behind me. There's a jut of rock a stone's throw away. It's hardly taller than me, crap for cover, but at least we won't be the tallest targets. I haul Gemma into the lee of the rock and turn her head out of the wind. Rat slinks around her hooves, his thick, coarse fur shedding water. I want to collapse against the rock, but I know better. Sitting flat against a tower of rock is a sure way to take a bolt of lightning up through the buttocks. Working Gemma's girth strap with slick fingers, I heave the saddle off her back, toss it down on the ground, and crouch on top of it, trying to avoid any contact with the earth. I'll squash the already beat up leather, but it's a far cry better than being struck by lightning. So in several, yay. So in one of my earliest backcountry jobs, which was in New Mexico, which is very, very much inspired the setting here that Lark is in, this kind of canyon country. I was summiting a mountain with several of my other campmates, and we were dummies about it. We had started late in the afternoon, and we hadn't really, we kind of thought that we were invincible. But the closer we got to the summit, this afternoon thunderstorm was rolling in, and the darker and more ominous it got. And eventually, we made the smart decision and turned around and kind of schwacked back down the mountainside and took cover in this little saddle of the two mountains. And that's really where I kind of I started with this impression of, as an outdoors person, sometimes there are some things you can kind of fool around with. You can joke about bears and you can joke about mountain lions, and as long as you're careful. But lightning and thunderstorms are not something that you take risks with. That's not like a foe that you can defeat. They'll kill you no matter who or where you are. So so that first experience with really, having to give up basically summiting this mountain that we'd worked all day to, hike up, was that first kind of taste of that. And then a few years later, I was in Badlands National Park, and this was when I was conducting research for my master's degree. And my research partner and I were out hiking on the just big, flat, wide open plain as far as the eye could see. And same kind of thing, a thunderstorm rolled in. We were literally the tallest things around. And we'd been out there for an hour that, we couldn't get back to the car easily. And so we ended up having to kind of schwack over to this kind of jut of rock that was really not that much taller than we were. And Lark does exactly what she should do in this situation. She knows that sitting flat on the ground is a great way, you're in flat contact with the ground. That's a great way to get electrocuted if there's a lightning bolt that hits nearby. So she takes her saddle off the horse, throws it on the ground, and crouches on top of it. I'm just a wellspring of useful information.
I love it.
So this is what my research partner and I did. We took off our backpacks and we put them on the ground. We stayed, several feet apart, because if you're close together, if a bolt strikes one of you, it's going to strike both of you. So and then we were crouching on top of our backpacks and kind of riding out this thunderstorm. And it was scary at the time, of course. These things are really terrifying, but it did make for a good story afterwards. So that's a good example of how some of the things in this book, and all of my books really, are inspired by some of these kind of misadventures I've had out in the backcountry. So
I think that's fabulous. When you first started that story and you said summiting a mountain, I heard summoning a mountain. I'm totally picturing your park ranger job is completely different. The mountains rise. Yeah, I'm like, that's cool.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things I loved about this book was the precision of how you describe the environment.
Yeah.
And it really comes alive around you. And I think that's got to be from you experiencing that and being out there as a park ranger. So you must tell me more about being a park ranger. So I need to know tell me your story. How did you get to be this park ranger and author? And you're an amazing artist as well. I don't know if you guys can see the cover art for the book right behind. Emily did that. Isn't that gorgeous?
Thank you.
So how do these things dovetail? Which started first? Was it the love of the outdoors, the love of the words, or did they both come together?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it all kind of, I've always done these things. I've always written, I've always drawn, I've always loved being outside. And none of those things I thought as I was growing up, I would be able to like make a career out of that, just, like pie in the sky kind of thing. And I fell into that trap that a lot of artists fall into, that, oh, I could never make money at this. And so that kind of chased me for a little while, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. And then I'd always, I'd written stories with my best friend all throughout grade school, and I'd always drawn. I'd always kept sketchbooks with me. This is the kind of thing I carry around with me all the time, and that's where most of my stories start. And then my family was always pretty outdoorsy. My dad's an entomologist, so he's all into bugs and stuff. And so that was kind of part of our experience growing up. But then in college, they really started to kind of to feed off each other and to inspire each other and become something more than just like, oh, these are kind of the weird tangential things that I like to do. And it was, I'm trying to think I started off in undergrad as an English major because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I didn't think that being an art major was a good idea. Yeah. I didn't think that being an art major was a good idea because I'd heard all the kind of basically misinformation my whole life about how artists never make any money, which is crap. Don't listen to them. Anyone who's an artist can make money as an artist, and it is a fantastic career, and don't listen to the haters. So, I had this kind of mini crisis in college where I was like, I don't really know what I want to do. I don't think I want to spend my life behind a computer, which is ironic because now that's what I do. But I found my college. I went to Clemson University, and they had one of the top parks and recreation programs in the country. I didn't even know that was a thing. This was before the TV show, so I didn't even know that was like a real thing, that you could go to school to become a park ranger. And once I started, I hopped over into that major instead, and I never looked back. And I loved the field. I loved the people I worked with, and I loved the research that I was doing. And I went into my master's degree studying ranger programs in national parks. And shortly after my master's degree is when I got married and had my kids. And after my first daughter was born, I started to feel this kind of cabin fever to that time that I had out in the wilderness. And that's when I really turned back to writing as kind of a lifeline to connect myself back to that person that I used to be. Right. And so my first book, Woodwalker, was really inspired on one of the first hikes that I was able to get out on after one of my kids was born. I've like been cooped up in the house for months. And so it was this like transformative experience being outside again. And that's where that first book was really inspired from. And after that, all of my other books, like I said, Sunshield, so much of this book was inspired by my time in New Mexico, working in the backcountry of New Mexico. And then the next couple summers in Yellowstone National Park. I have my ranger hat here. I wore it yesterday for my launch. It doesn't have the hat band on it. So
I love it.
Doesn't have my ranger band on it, but at least
please tell me you write while wearing that, because that's
I don't. It's very hot.
Fair enough.
So I just pulled it out for a special event yesterday. So yeah, but no, I don't. I should though. I feel like it would be
I think you would like channel the outdoors through it.
Motivating factor here.
Yes.
Anyway. Yeah, so all those things, they all inspire each other. My time as a park ranger always inspires the stories that I write, the stuff that I draw. But then the stuff that I write and draw also inspires my time as a park ranger, because it's all about storytelling. It's all about finding the heartbeat and the emotional connection. My job as a park ranger is to connect people to the resource that they're looking at, whether it's a geyser or a waterfall or a salamander or whatever. Why is that important to them? And that all comes down to emotion. And so the storytelling aspect is really what kind of threads it all together ultimately.
I love that. So how do you balance it? The writing and the park rangering? You do
Very tired.
You have to segment times of your life when you're out park rangering, and then when you come back and you're right. Is that the verb for it? Park rangering?
Rangering, yeah, can be. Yep. It is now.
Great tonight.
We're writers, Sarah Beth. We can do anything we want.
Yeah, right. It's now officially.
Yes, it is a lot, and I'm very tired. The thing about my job as a ranger is that it's only during the summer, so it's not a full-time job, and it's not even every summer. Like this summer was I tend to go every other summer so that my family doesn't have to pick up and move every 6 months. So this was already one of my off summers, which I'm kind of glad about because I feel like I dodged a bullet. I'm hearing from a lot of my ranger friends who are out in the parks right now, and it's chaotic anyway, but it's extra chaotic this year. So if you go, anyone who's traveling this summer and you're going to a park, be really nice to the park rangers. Be really nice to anyone you come in contact with who's having to work. It's nuts out there right now. So it is just during the summer. So I tend to try to avoid having deadlines or working. I try to manage my schedule so that I don't have those things to worry about during the summer. Right. It's never really worked out that way. I always seem to have deadlines to work on. Like last summer when I first got to Yellowstone, my housing my paperwork hadn't cleared, my background check hadn't cleared, even though I'd worked there before. And so they were like, well, you can't move into housing. You can't start yet because your background check hasn't cleared. And I'm like, but I'm here. What do I do? Like, where do I go? So I ended up camping for a little while, and I crashed with another ranger for a little while and then camped some. And I didn't know how long it was going to be. So I opened up commissions and I said, okay, listen, I have to get through the next X amount of time without really a job right now. So I took on a bunch of kind of emergency art commissions, and people signed up for them and they PayPal'd me their money, and it was great. And then like the next day, the park was like, okay, we need you here tomorrow. And I was like, wait, oh no. So first week that I was in training, I also, everyone was like getting to know each other, and I was like moonlighting over in the dorm to finish these art commissions. So and then I've also, I had to rewrite my third book, Creatures of Light, during one summer when I was working in Great Smoky Mountains, and so I try to balance it, but it doesn't always work out that way, and I really have to give props to. That's why I often acknowledge the ranger crews that I've worked with in my acknowledgements, because there are times when it's just like, Emily, you're leaving the visitor center without your pants on, like come back, and I'm like my head is completely somewhere else. So yeah, it is a challenge to balance, but I have a really good support system. I have family close by. My husband has always been very tolerant of the craziness of all these different things going on. So, and then I'm able to just kind of try to prioritize as much as I can. So here at home, just knowing that if I'm trying to get good writing done, I'm not going to be a very good mom to my kids. And if I'm trying to parent my children, I'm not going to get good writing done. So just knowing when it's time to either put something down and being like, okay, this just isn't going to happen right now. I have to be a mom. Or like right now, there's a sign on my door that says, go ask dad. So like setting a boundary there where it's like, okay, you have to fend for yourself for a little while. So yeah, just trying to prioritize and put up boundaries that make sense. And really carve out that time, very, very purposefully carve out that time. But it is a challenge.
I have spreadsheets, lots of spreadsheets, working back from the deadlines, and like, this is where life comes in,
yes.
and then I redo the spreadsheets when life comes in. It makes me feel like it's all under control, and that's perfect.
That's right.
So do you have a set routine of how many hours you write a day? Do you have like special rituals you do? What are your writing habits?
Yeah, I did have a pretty good system in place before the pandemic sent my kids home from school, and now it's just back to like binging time whenever I can. Yeah, my main sort of ritual is making myself a fresh cup of tea or coffee, and then shutting the door and really saying, okay, especially now with my kids home from school, it's back to when they were really little, I really had to make the most of these little snippets of time that came my way. And when they were at school, it was like, okay, great, now I have this time that I can depend on from day to day, which was really something I hadn't had before. And now we're back to that same kind of lifestyle where it's like, well, I could have all day, or I could maybe just have 15 minutes and I don't really know. So it's really being able to kind of pivot as much as you can. And that's not always easy. And I don't always do it very well, where my brain feels very sticky and stuff. But yeah, I do, like you said, I have a deadline currently for another project, and I have counted back from that deadline. Okay, how many words do I need to write each day if I want to make this deadline? So I'm trying to, so I'm trying to meet that from day to day. Sometimes I get more, sometimes I don't get enough, and I know I'm going to be working on the weekend. But yeah, it's just trying to really kind of rely on that mental space and being able to pivot and say, okay, I just finished putting the dishes away. Now it's time to write, and I've got to turn that part of my brain on. So
yeah, I found that sort of in the beginning when I started writing, I had a lot of writing myths that I clung to. The idea that you needed this large stretch of time to write, or that you needed to feel inspired or not exhausted, or be in a particular mindset, or have no distractions or whatever. And I found that letting go of those, acknowledging that they're myths, has been a huge help. I mean, I can write with whatever noise going on in the background. I could write in a little bit of time. I could write in a long amount of time, and knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect, and not waiting for inspiration, because you know that
the whole concept of, I'm sure you get asked this too, where people say, how do you find time to write? Well, you don't find the time is
steal it.
Yeah, that's right. You have to make that time, and you've got to prioritize it. And yeah, it's funny that you talk about being able to write with anything in the background. When I wrote my first trilogy, it was when my kids were both very little, like 6 months and 2 years old. And we were in this tiny little 900 square foot house where you couldn't be anywhere in the house and not hear everything else that was going on. And I remember writing so many of these scenes in Woodwalker with like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood on the back, like singing about getting along with your friends. And I'm like writing battle scenes and stuff. So now I have an office with a door that can close, and it's very exciting.
Really?
but I feel like starting off in that environment, it really forced me to be very flexible and very adaptive, and very able to write under not ideal conditions, which is probably easier than it had been if I had started out where everything was very ideal for writing. And so I am kind of glad that I started out on that end of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah, there's something to say. So is it your fourth book, did you say?
Mm-hmm. Fourth published book.
There's something magical about knowing you've done it before.
Yes, definitely.
It can get you through some of the days of like just trusting in your own sense of story.
Yeah.
To get you through it. What do you wish that you had known when you were first starting out? What would you tell, if there are any aspiring or beginning writers out there watching this, what would you tell them?
Yeah. I think it's important, especially if you're looking at this as a legitimate career, or even if you're not putting all your eggs in one basket and thinking like, this is the one, this manuscript is the one. And some of the best advice that I got when I was first starting out, I remember I was stressing about release day for Woodwalker, my first book. And I was like, I don't know, like how, what time should I announce things? And like, when should I what kind of online presence should I have on just that particular day? And another author, Leona Brooks, who's also a Harper author, she said, you need to look at the long game. You're not in this to sell 1,000 books in a single day. You're not going to sell 1,000 books in a single day. And if that's what your mindset is, you're just going to end up disappointed. You need to be in this to sell a few books every day for the rest of your life, give or take. And that it was like someone flipped a switch, and it was like, yeah, totally. And having that long-term kind of vision and view, and knowing that every little step is just kind of a little stepping stone, and nobody's an overnight success. That doesn't happen. That's a myth. And so being more focused on building sort of a solid, stable career that can kind of grow organically is more important than trying to hit all the right notes with this one book, and that it's either this book or nothing, right? It's this book or bust. And thinking that it's going to be, we're all going to be the next J.K. Rowling or whatever. And so, yeah, so I think for someone starting off, that's an important thing to look at. You know, you have more than one story in you. And if this book doesn't succeed, if this book doesn't even get past the querying process, what do you have? What's next? You know, what else do you have in your toolbox? And certainly there's something there. So yeah, I think maybe looking ahead with that long goal.
I like that. I always tell people that when you finish a book, the next thing you should do is start the next one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, I actually do. I don't like when I'm not writing. It makes the world feel unbalanced. I don't like it. So whenever I turn in a book, I start the next one that afternoon.
Yeah.
I don't take any time between them.
Yeah.
You
get a scratch.
I do. I'm happiest when I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
If I write every day, then the world is okay, even when the world is noticeably not okay.
So I, for a variety of reasons, like many of us, I think I see a counselor, and we've been doing kind of telehealth, like teletherapy sessions since the pandemic started. And a couple weeks ago, she asked me, like, what are you doing for self-care? And I was like, I mean, I try to take a shower. I made myself coffee. And she was like, no, Emily, come on. Like, you need to do something every day. And I was like, okay. And so that day I started a new manuscript. I have another manuscript that I'm working on that I really like. But it's pretty heavy, and it gets into like climate change and climate fantasy, and the idea like magic is a non-renewable resource and it's being used up, just like.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
Which is really cool. And it's a great concept, but it's also super depressing to write and research. And combined with everything else that was going on, I was just like, oh, I can't write this anymore. And so I switched to this like super fluffy, like self-insert national park fan fiction with a stranger who's going on a cross-country road trip in her van with her dog to start her, you know, and it was like the greatest form of self-care that I've ever conceived of.
That sounds so fun. I want to read that.
At my next therapy session, my counselor was like, okay, so have you done the self-care thing? And I was like, yes, let me tell you. And I started telling her about that. And she was like, okay. And I was like, no, really, it's great. And she's like, all right, I believe you.
That's so funny. I was doing an interview once and somebody asked me what I do when I'm not writing, and I do a complete blank. I'm like, I like to eat. And then I went on this whole thing talking about how much I love pizza. And I'm like, oh God. There's nothing else, but it makes me happy. So, what can I say? So what drew you to fantasy? Why this genre?
Yeah, I mean,
it's awesome. I will answer it for you. It's awesome.
Yeah. I've always, I grew up reading fantasy like so many of us. I love that your book is dedicated to Tamara Pierce. I think that's amazing.
It is.
Is one of your protagonists sort of semi-named after her as well? Tamara?
Yeah, it's this one that the main character is named Tamara.
Yeah.
Because she is great-hearted and kicks ass, just like Tamara Pierce does.
Yes, that's awesome. You can't probably see them, but there are all of my Tamara Pierce books down there.
Oh, yay, mine are over there, which you can't see.
Yeah, so I grew up on those, steady stream of those.
Hey, me too.
Yeah, and Tolkien, I mean, this is like my childhood bookshelf. So all of Tolkien and the Queen's Thief series is still one of my favorite book series.
Yeah, those are over there.
Yeah. And there are all my Harry Potters, of course.
Harry Potter was right here.
So yeah, there we go. Yay. So I grew up just reading these sword and sorcery novels, and it just became part of my psyche. And some of the first books I ever wrote, my best friend and I in grade school, when we were in elementary school, we had an imaginary world called Imaginopolis that we played in.
I love it.
And when we moved to middle school, we realized that we weren't going to have recess time anymore. How were we going to play in Imaginopolis? We weren't going to be able to. And so kind of organically, we just started writing stories about it instead. And those were also like self-insert fan fiction. It was just us having adventures in this magical world that we
Solid. I love it.
Yeah, and it was amazing because we would each write during the school day when we were supposed to be inevitably paying attention in class. And we rode the school bus home together, and we would swap notebooks and read what the other had written. And we would just enjoy it, but we'd also give each other feedback. And at the time, we just did it because we liked it. But now I'm like, we were learning how to give critique, and we were
you had your first writing group.
and,
That's adorable.
right? And she's, spoiler, she's still my best friend. She's still one of my beta readers. And,
That's awesome. Oh, she must be so proud of you. That's so cool.
So it really was just kind of part of my psyche growing up, and so many of the stories that I wrote. Actually, when I first started writing Woodwalker, I had, which was my first novel, I assumed that there would be a magic system in it. And I kind of got like a third of the way through the book and I was like, there's no magic in this story. And it's the same for Sunshield's set in the same world. It's not, you don't have to have read the first trilogy to make sense of Sunshield, but they are set in the same world. And yeah, there's not a magic system. It is an alternate world. But what I found as I was writing is that the natural world, the role of nature, really took over that need for a magic system. And so all of wonder and awe sort of comes from the natural world, which I really love. And I really have enjoyed kind of delving into, you know, if you're writing a fantasy, but it's not a magical fantasy, where does that sense of kind of otherworldliness come in? And it really is the natural phenomena that they encounter. So I really love that. But like I said, another one of my manuscripts is a legitimate magical fantasy, and I'm having a lot of fun with that one too.
That's cool. Is Sunshield going to be a duology, a trilogy?
Yeah, awesome. Duology. Mm-hmm.
What's the next one called?
I don't think the title is officially released.
Okay, sorry.
I can say it or not. I don't want to make David mad, Sarah.
I didn't know. It's a secret.
It's secrets. But we are working on it. We're working on the title and the cover, and it's been a lot of fun writing book two. There's a lot more. I really like writing survival situations, and there's like a whole in there where I just take everything away from my characters and like push them out into the wilderness and make them.
That's fun. I love this kind of story. Yes. Have you ever seen Alone on the History Channel?
No.
Oh, you'd love it because they're totally shoved out in the wilderness and they have to film themselves. And I love those kind of survival shows.
Yeah,
I would last awesome. Like 3 minutes out in the wilderness. Where I'm like, take me home.
Right. Someone come get me.
Some chocolate or something. I would so be the first one to go in a zombie apocalypse. You want me by your side so you can like throw me at the zombies. And
you just have to run faster.
Right, exactly. So we actually have a bunch of questions that have come in. Let me see what they say. Are there other settings, real or imagined, you'd like to write about or explore in the future?
Yeah, totally. So I, last summer and then a few summers ago, I was in Yellowstone National Park, and that place is it's so bizarre and alien and otherworldly. It's hard not to make connections to like the fantasy genre while you're there. And in fact, one of my favorite ranger programs that I gave while I was there was called, it was a campfire program, and it was called Dire Wolves and Dragonfire, A Magical Journey Through Yellowstone. And it was connecting all like fantasy elements with the park.
I want to see that.
Yeah. So like the super volcano that fuels the hot springs and stuff. It's like the dragons and, you know, Mount Doom and that kind of thing. And then all these little alien life forms and stuff. It was a lot of fun. It was a really fun program.
That sounds fantastic.
That's like perfect niche Emily. That's like super fantasy, but also nature nerdy at the same time. So I do have another manuscript that's set in kind of a fantasy Yellowstone. And that's a lot of fun because, like I said, there's just so much power and magic in that landscape anyway. Yeah. I've always wanted to write a seafaring story, but I've always kind of held myself back because I'm like, Emily, you've never sailed a tall ship. Clearly you're not.
So yeah, I'm going to hold up my other book.
Yes, The Deepest Blue. Woo!
It says tons of sea monsters.
Yes.
The main character is a free diver, so she can hold her breath for a long time and go down. And I am kind of terrified of being underwater. So you can totally write your seafarer book just fine. Yeah. It's a lot safer than actually going underwater for like 11 minutes.
It's true. That's awesome.
I do watch so many videos of people that would learn how to hold their breath.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating and horrifying and awesome all at once.
Yeah, totally. No, it's funny. Yeah, the funny research that you get into when you're
I know. I keep wanting to feel like there should be a disclaimer on the Google searches. It's for a book.
That's right. I think I put that disclaimer I think for like my third book, Creatures of Light, I was emailing my dad about like how I could poison someone with this. And I like put a disclaimer at the start of the email, like for the Google, like, you know, red flags that are going to pop up. This is for a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, no, I would love to write a seafaring story. Yeah, that would be fun.
That'd be awesome. Okay, the next question. As someone who draws, what do you think might be similar about the processes of drawing something and writing about it? And what's different? Oh, I like that question.
That is a good question. I mean, in both cases, things start off very rough, right? I mean, you start off with, like, this is one of my sketchbooks here. And, you know, frequently, let me see. Yeah, okay, so here are characters from another manuscript, and they're super rough. There's not a lot of detail to them. Here are thumbnails. These are even rougher. These are thumbnails from another project that I'm working on. And yeah, so things start off very poorly defined and just kind of an idea on the page. And that's so similar to writing. You know, in some cases it's just literally just an outline or just words on a page, or plot point. I remember sending a synopsis to our editor at one point, and one of the plot points was just like, things hit the fan, and then I like moved on, and that was the only point that I had there. And so yeah, and then you refine, and you start picking and choosing the composition and the form and the colors, and it's the same kind of thing for your plot. You start to carve it down to where it's just clarified a little bit more. So yeah, I think they're both very similar, and I think the process and the revision and getting other eyeballs onto it, certainly with art, you're so you know, tied to that piece of work that it's really hard to see. This is why artists, especially when you're working digitally, they flip the piece, and all of a sudden all of the terrible things that you've done are like perfectly. I wish you could do that with a manuscript. There was some magic way you could like turn it so that it's completely different, and you're like, oh, this is so bad. But so that's why having other people look at it and give you feedback is so important. So yeah, so I think they're really similar. It's a really good question.
That's cool. So are you an outliner, or are you discovered as you go along?
I'm a plotter for sure. I like to have that. Sometimes I get paralyzed if I don't know what's coming next. And you know, I know some people thrive as a pantser and they can just kind of write as it comes to them. But for me, it's actually, it really does paralyze me. I'll get to a point where a character, especially if I don't know a character very well yet. You know, when I was writing the third book in my first trilogy, by that point, I kind of knew my characters and I knew how they would react in any given situation. But when I was starting Sunshield, I didn't know these characters very well, and so they'd reach a point where they had to make a decision, and I was like, I don't know, they could do anything, you know, anything could happen. And some of those scenes can be some of the hardest for me to write. So if I don't have a clear sense of where the plot is going, I have a really challenging time actually continuing. That's not to say I can't make things up on the fly, and some parts of my books, you know, things, you know, have happened differently than how I planned them, and they've turned out a lot better. And so I can free write when I need to, but I do really like, I have notebooks and sketchbooks and spreadsheets and timelines and all kinds of stuff.
Nice.
Like having, it just helps me stay organized in my head so that then the creativity can flow a little bit more.
Right.
How about you?
Well, I outline, but then I don't always follow it. But I do like having it to feel like I know what the shape of the story is going to be, so that I've got the breadth of it.
Yes.
And then I leave myself open to running off in different direction. Like in my Queens of Renthia series, there was a character that just waltzed on the page that wasn't in any of the outlines, Lady Garna. And she ended up being hugely important. Yeah. So awesome. I like to leave room for those discoveries. And then I will just simply write a brand new outline between the drafts as if I read it all along.
Oh yeah. My outlines morph along with the book. And oftentimes the outline that I created in the beginning, it turns out to be really terrible. Like one of my characters in book 2, Ashes to Fire, he's supposed to be kind of the romantic foil to the lead character. And the way I had planned him, he just like kept falling flat on his face. Like every time I wrote the scene where they met like 6 times from the ground up. And every time there was just no chemistry there. And meanwhile, this other character who was like kind of snarky and funny and lighthearted would come on the page. He'd like hit a home run and then he'd get off. And there was way more, attraction to that character. And so I realized like I've been going about this all wrong. I've got these characters switched. And so so I can totally appreciate that where the outline and the plan changes. It's in a
because you discover things as you go along, because you're bringing it to life as you write it, and you can see new things in it and so forth. And I used to think it was so like precious when authors would talk about their characters taking over.
Yes.
It totally happens. Like,
it totally happens.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Fictional people are talking to me now. That's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm a normal person.
Somebody wants to know when your fantasy Yellowstone book comes out. They want to read it.
That is still that's the climate change fantasy.
Oh, that was a climate change
currently. So that one is still very much in the drafting stage. It will be years and years before it is even ready to go to an editor. So it's in the wings right now. Don't get excited about it, but I am having a lot of fun writing it.
Somebody else would like to know, what are your favorite art supplies? Are you particular or just happy to use whatever you can to get a drawing on the page?
Yeah, I'm not super particular. I used to be one of those people who was like, oh, I only use like Staedtler art pencils and it's only, my 3B lead consistency or whatever, but I'm not like this. I picked this up off the desk yesterday. It's one of my kids' unicorn pencils, and this is what I've been using for like the past week. I love that. I like watercolors, and this is my watercolor sketchbook that I one of the ones that I carry with me when I'm like out in the parks.
Beautiful.
So there's from last summer in Yellowstone. There's some of the hot springs and the hikes, and so I really like having watercolors with me. There's a geyser.
Gorgeous. I love
and
it.
I like pen and inks. I've gotten a better appreciation for pen and ink. I used to only use pencil because like pen really scared me because like once you put the mark on the page, you can't take it. But now I really, really love pen and inks. And so I there's waterfalls. So I really love having a watercolor sketchbook with me. I use just like whatever. I think I use Micron pens. Just whatever you can find at your art store. That one doesn't even have a brand. Micron, yeah. So I use Micron pens. And then just kind of, your good old number 2 pencil and it's just a kind of ordinary sketchbook that you can get at your local craft store. I use for my digital work, I use a Cintiq tablet and Photoshop. There are certainly other programs. A lot of people like the iPad Pro. A lot of people like some of the free like GIMP and different software that you can use. And so I'm kind of the opinion that you can make art with kind of whatever you have. Certainly, if you're trying to make a quality piece, quality materials can go a long way. But if you're just trying to have something with you that you like, this is the notebook that I carried around with me in Yellowstone the first summer. There's smog on the front. First summer in Yellowstone, this is where Lark, my protagonist from Sunshield, first started. This is where she first appeared in this sketchbook. Yeah. And it's just this little tiny, like, who knows, someone got it for me somewhere, and it's just this little tiny like pocket notebook. But that's where a lot of my stuff has started. So so I'm not super wedded to different specific types of art materials, but it's just kind of whatever you feel comfortable with, I think.
Awesome. Somebody in the comments wants to know, do you think of publishing those watercolors as a book? They are beautiful. I really like them.
Thank you. I don't know. I've considered art books. Art books can be, unless you have a really strong following, art books can be hard to sell. But I have thought about doing like postcards or, different types of prints or something like that. So, but maybe, we'll see if they gain momentum and people seem to really like them. I might. Never say never.
Yeah. Because somebody asked a question that was totally on my list of questions too, so I'm going to read it to you. what was the hardest part about writing this book, and what was one of the happiest?
I like that. I like that phrasing. Yeah. So many times people say, like, what was the easiest part? It's like, oh, it's all.
No, happiest is really, because there's moments of joy in every book. I mean, I wouldn't write if it wasn't for the joy. I'm trying to add joy to the world.
That's right. Exactly. So some of the hardest parts were, there's a lot of political intrigue in the book, which I really enjoy reading and writing. But it can be a challenge to get that on the page without it being really tedious for the reader. And several chapters in the beginning, they were just a lot longer with Veran, when we're starting with Veran in the palace, and he's kind of laying down the foundation of all the politics that are happening. And I had to trim that scene so many times and just take chunk after chunk after chunk out. And like everyone from my beta readers to my agent to my editor was like, give us less. and they were right, they're frequently right. And so I really had to streamline those scenes to keep the interest and the pacing going, but still lay down the politics that I needed to lay down. And that was very much a kill your darlings kind of time where I was like, oh, but I really love this one line, or I really love this facet that I had planned out. But it, ultimately for the sake of the book and making it a better book, it was important to trim those scenes down and not like give people the Silmarillion in my first, first 3 chapters. So so that was a challenge. But the happiest part was, I don't know, I know I've said it before, I really like writing the wilderness scenes and the survival scenes. I really like when I can see how a character connects to their environment, because every character connects a little bit differently, and they all notice different things, and they have different opinions about what's going on around them. And so I really loved those scenes where I was able to really explore the character's connection to their environment. And I'm trying to think, there were scenes where, I guess when just Lark and Veran are traveling, and they're kind of traveling through the desert, and Veran's noticing certain things, but then Lark is noticing others, and they're kind of bantering back and forth. And those were a lot of fun to write. So yeah, those are some of the happiest scenes. Also, Tamsin, who's the third character, her thing is in prison. I was kind of worried about at the outset. She spends most of the book in a cell, basically. And I was like, oh no, this is going to be really boring for people to read.
No, those things are great.
So she, her kind of connection to what's happening outside, she has this tiny little window, and every night at the same time, these swarms of bats come flying out of the caves nearby and just fill the air. And anyone who follows me on social media, most of the images that I post of Tamsin have bat imagery, bat symbolism. There she is, with the bats in the background. And that was that also comes from experiences that I've had watching these bat swarms come out of caves, and it's just such a humbling experience to see these creatures just swarming and wheeling around you. And so I really loved that. Even though she was locked in these kind of same 4 walls, she had this very, very tangible, very dynamic connection to the greater world and the outside world. So yeah, those are my favorite scenes to write.
I love that. So you guys out there that are listening to this, I hope you guys go read Sunshield, because it is a magical book that will just suck you in. And Emily does such a beautiful job. It's got these 3 characters that are all equally mesmerizing, and she weaves them together. And so you guys are in for a treat if you haven't read it. And if you have read it, then you've just had a delicious treat, and you can look forward to the next one. Emily, it was so much fun talking with you. Thank you.
It was great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, awesome. Hello, everybody. This is Constance again, hopping back on. Just a huge, huge thank you to Sarah and to Emily for sharing your new book with us. Sarah couldn't have said it any better than I just did. Both amazing authors. Make sure to check out their work at Mysterious. And I've got the link up above to make it easy for you guys to go and find their books. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everyone.